Whoa. Hello, everybody. It is Monday, April 20th, day 1 trillion of this pandemic from the feel of it. And I am Sam Guayana. I'm here to break down a song called Seed. In brackets, it is also called Rosemary by a band called Certainty from here in Southern Ontario. And this is a fun one for me because I got to mix a friend's project. So instead of I didn't produce this song, I just did the mix. It was produced by Cory Bergeron, who also has his own little YouTube channel where he's running through stuff like this. So yeah, Cory Bergeron produced it. He recorded it. Him and Brent, the guitarist, collaborated on the recording, I think. I think there were some points where Brent had done some stuff as well. And then when it came time to mix, I was sent the tracks and I mixed it. It's a really fun song for drums. It's a really fun song for little tasty treats in the background, which Cory's super well known for and had a lot of fun listening to and learning from those as well. And it's also got a couple cool little things like, background beats and noises and stuff. So a big thing I want to talk about in this song is, filling in space with those little sounds in the production where even though I didn't do it, it's nice to show you that other producers also do these things, as well as building dynamic. This song is incredibly dynamic from the quietest parts to the loudest, as you can see here in the final mixes. They get very low and then very large, and it's exciting to really lean into that dynamic. So without further ado, I'm going to play a bit of this song up to about this chorus over here, and hope you enjoy it.
I'm out of touch, and I'm out of reach. I'm buried underneath the ground beneath your feet. Care too much, and here I am, living with the stones and trying to bloom so I can breathe.
Yeah, that is a very fun dynamic jam. All right, so let's talk a little bit about it. One thing I love about Cory Bergeron's recordings is he doesn't cheap out in the important spots, and the important spots to me are drums. As I've talked about in a few of the things I've produced, I don't have the biggest drum room in the world, so I'm constantly trying to learn different ways to make it sound big. And Cory's one of those guys that loves to go out to different studios to do drums. So I believe he did these at his usual hangout drum studio, which if you've ever listened to any Cory Bergeron stuff, it's huge sounding. He's got 2 sets of stereo rooms, and then 2 different mono rooms, and then a couple printed rooms for some other stuff. But these really make the set that song's sound. They really bring the bigness in when they need to, and they really drive the point home about how important, even something as simple as just doing drums in a big room, how that can make or break the sound of a record. So you hear there when I took them out at the tail end, I'll play it one more time. You hear the verbs from that I have in the session and the verb on the sample, but really a lot of it is coming from those rooms. Yeah, suffice to say that this recording wouldn't have sounded nearly as good as the final version came out had it not been for the drum sound. That's one of the big reasons I was excited to do a song off this record. It's also really tough to choose a song off this record. I chose a bit of a simpler one than some of the other songs. Some of the other songs have like a lot of production and stuff, and I think it was just I wanted to show how, a couple rhythm guitar tracks, a bass track, and a really well-recorded drum set do so much on their own for a song that you don't need to, you don't need to do a crazy amount of stuff. One thing I'm going to talk about in this session is you'll see a few plugins I don't normally use, or like longer chains over here, sort of on the vocals. Oh, I'm going to try this thing. Give me a sec. Ooh, yeah, zoom over here. All these crazy vocals. One thing I did was I got the session from Cory in a certain way and opted to leave what felt right already. Sometimes you get a session, or sometimes you get the tracks and you start from scratch. Sometimes you get the opportunity to get the session and work off of it. And this was one of those. So in these really quiet vocal parts, I might have gone in and done a few extra things. Like, I don't think I've ever used revival on a vocal in my life. But you know what? When I played it back and I started mixing these vocals here, these darker yellow tracks, the way that they needed to be, I realized that these were working as is. So yeah, let's go through. I'm going to start with my mix bus here. It's very typical Sam stuff going on. The Neve console is the setting on all these VMRs, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, Neve console. I think I was really big into it at the time. I love the extra low end that it adds to really roomy drums. These days, I don't use the Neve console as much, but I'm also not having the opportunity to mix super huge drums always, and I find that it works really well on that. It looks like at some point I had a bus boost I tried my typical bus boost setting, and I didn't like it, so I bailed on it. And then FG Gray, auto. I never do auto these more. It is a bit of an older mix. It is probably about 6 or 8 months old. No, it's older than that. It's probably about a year old. However, listening to this is the style. Like, I would still do everything I did in this mix today, including the way I did the samples and everything, just because of how well the drums came to me. So, aside from FG Gray, I'm using auto release, which these days I'm generally using a faster one. I guess I liked the sound of auto better in this one. Yeah, I think when it comes to roomier drums too, auto's a little bit better than fast release, because it doesn't tend to squash any of the bigness. So yeah, so that's my master chain there, or mix bus chain, I mean. And then of course virtual tape last. 30 IPS, FG9 tape, and the 2-track, which is the general tape that loads up, I believe. I didn't do any of the stuff I would normally do here. I probably added the tape early on and mixed into it, seeing how I didn't touch any of that. And then Kramer tape on vocals, just to keep it in place. And then different VTMs on guitars, bass, and back to Kramer tape on drums. I think the drums were super hi-fi and really exciting when I mixed them, and I wanted to just cut that a little bit. So what I did was... that's usually my trick. I'll use Kramer tape when I want a bit of saturation and a bit of the high fidelity cut, and I'll use VTM when I want a little bit of a different, more modern tape machine sound. Okay, so We'll take a look quickly actually at these. The bus comp is doing a lot of work in this song, and that is by design. So we'll take a listen and we'll take a look at that while we do that. I'm also going to go to the chorus instead. Yeah, that's a very important aspect when you're working with. I tend to find on auto, you can usually push a bus comp into that like 5 dB point a little bit more without it sounding too squished. Whereas sometimes when you have a fast attack, fast release, typical of my settings these days. Yeah, I don't know. It makes the snare kind of sticky and not what I, want in a slow sort of thing like this. All right, so we'll start from the top. We've got little lo-fi beats, chill lo-fi beats to do your homework. That was printed like that when I received it from Cory, so it had its own little vibe going on. Well, all I did was in one spot in the song. It happens over the drums here. I ended up killing the low end of it, but boosting a resonant noise in it to make it pop through this drum roll. So we'll take a listen to this into the part, and then we'll work backwards, take a look, and talk about it. Yeah, so when it comes to layering little filtery beats on top of things like that, it's good to sort of kill their low end so they're not competing for space. It was more important to have the essence of that drum beat there than it was to have it at a full frequency. So, it's really just peppering on top what it needs to do. A few other things. Generally, I put percussion into stuff, but Cory's a lot like me, so this song came to me with percussion in place. And I just went through and did nothing. Oh, yeah, that's what I do. Yeah, sometimes I just listen back, and when it works, I roll with it. Looks like I maybe tried to remove a frequency in the tambo and then bailed on it because I realized it wasn't that big of a deal. Happens a lot in my mixes when I'm mixing other people's stuff. I usually use samples of percussion. I'm usually a big fan of. Let me see if I can find it. I'm usually a big fan of. Where is it? Sorry, give me a sec. The go-to tambo in the That Sound percussion library, organic percussion, tends to be my, hilariously enough, go-to tambourines for songs. There's a lot of really good stuff. The loops come in 10 BPM increments, and they're easily stretchable with no problems or anything like that. So I'll do that. And if I'm looking for something specific, then maybe I'll go grab a tambourine and record it. But for the most part, no, I'm using loops. All right, so a few extra things I did in this song. I added crash dubs on the tops of big parts. Typical Sam move there without it. Notice it didn't really need it, so I added it in a song like this for really feeling the drop of each part happen. And then just a kick and those are for consistency. See, they add a lot of low-end beef and a lot of like perceived volume when they're in there. Let's take a look at what I'm doing to them. Chances are I'm doing generally what I do, like I said, fairly creature of habit, scooping out what I don't like in the kick drum around 300-400 hertz, boosting its attack, making it a little brighter, and then just holding it down with a bit of compression. Really, all it's doing there is just adding top and bottom. Oh, I forgot to safe solo that. Like, it's still very tasty sounding without any EQ on this thing. So, you know, adding that EQ back just really adds a little bit of excitement, helping it poke through the mix a little bit better, more than it needing to be there. And that's a valid move. Like, you shouldn't EQ anything that doesn't need it. You shouldn't whatever. But if something sounds really good, sometimes when you start adding it to the whole element of everything, it starts to get lost. And that's usually when I go reach for EQ. So it just pokes a little bit more once you EQ that. We'll take a look at some other aspects of the drums. I want to look at these room mics, but we'll go through the rest first. Leviathan, yeah, that is a big thing. I I almost always use medium attack fast release. I don't like slow release. This is always the setting on my CLAs, and then I never go slower than 5 on the distressors. Yeah, that's exactly it. I don't want it to grab too fast and become pokey. I want it to grab naturally, and then I want it to release it right away. I want it just to clamp down the most important spot, keep it in place, and almost sound like it's not, I use these compressors more for the characteristics than I do for actual compression. Obviously, I want them compressed and held into place, but I don't particularly care about the type of compression as much as about the sound that compression imparts. So when I'm using the, fast or medium attack fast release on the arouser, which is a distressor, I like how distressors sound when that happens more than just, say, like a stock plugin doing this. So yeah, I almost never do slow release. The only time or slow attack, slow release. The only time I ever do that is sometimes on a guitar bus, just to pin them in place with like an LA3A. Yes, and I do use the same settings when I'm tracking into Pro Tools. On bass guitar, when I'm tracking bass, sometimes I'll back off the release a little bit, but the attack is always there. And it's usually 4-1, 20-1, or all. And then I'm pinning pretty crazy the whole time. I'll try to find, what am I doing on the parallel bus? Parallel bus is drum comp. Yeah, we'll take a look at the parallel bus. We'll actually take a listen to it. Yeah, see, so at a 20-1, which 20-1 sounds incredible in the arouser, medium attack, fast release with a lot of reduction really gives that sort of wide sound to the drums. Adding length to drums with parallel compression is really important when you have a lot of room mics too, because rooms themselves are just characteristics of the length of time it takes to actually hit those microphones. And sometimes with close microphones blending in, you start to realize, cool, I've got a great sounding close snare, I've got a great sounding room, but they're not playing together. And what's the problem? And the problem is that close sample or the close drum isn't interacting in the right way with the room mics. See that extra ring that happens when I bring that drum compressor back in, the parallel? That extra ring really helps to glue with the ring in the room mics. And if you know anything about doing a lot of room mics, a really big important thing to focus on in the room mics is how the snare sounds. So when you've got, a ringy snare in the room mics, it's really good to complement that by trying to make the real snare, ring with it. All right, so I'm going to talk about these quick because I'm here now. Room mics. I love room mics. It's one of the things I wish I could do more of in my space that actually sounded really good. And what I just did on these room mics, because they came to me sounding so good already, was just, cleanup job where necessary. Taking out a little bit of energy here and reducing some frequencies that were sort of annoying. And then just slamming them with like all buttons in on an 1176, which is my favorite way to do rooms. That or 20 to 1 ratio. And you can see I used different room mics for different characteristics. I copied that EQ over just because it was top end stuff that was bothering me. And I copied the compressor over too. And, on their own, they both sound pretty good. But you feel the weight in that second set of room mics, and blending those two together. The weight was a little aggressive, so obviously I keep it quieter. But blending those two together give you a very full room sound. These two are fairly trashy. I don't think that they were left and right rooms. I'm actually not entirely sure what they are. But I realized that one went into compression really hard during tracking, and the other one didn't. But when it came time to mix, I wanted to treat them as room mics, as a stereo set, sort of. So what I ended up doing was, let me see, yeah. This EQ looks super weird with this really wide curve here and everything, and that is because I EQ matched this room mono 1 to the room mono 2. So take a listen without them. I'm going to put these in mono for a sec. We'll take a listen. You've got this one here. And this other one. Completely different characteristics, completely different microphones. So I liked the brightness, I liked the energy, especially of the slammed one. So I matched the unslammed one EQ-wise to the slammed one. They're not exact, but in the context of an entire mix, they blend really well, and they do their job, especially with the other rooms. And I think I just wanted to capture that big room vibe. I mean, a lot of the songs on this record are slow. Um, and I really just wanted to, accent the cymbals being really bright and everything. And I wanted to, make sure the kit sounded like a complete thing at the end of the day. Zach, how do you decide safe solo? Okay. Sort of a crapshoot with safe soloing for me. I'll safe solo if I'm working a lot and I really want to focus on the sound of something, and I want to see how it plays together. So if I'm mixing a lot of stuff and I'm really focusing on making sure a fake room blends with a real room, let's say, I'll have my drum verb safe soloed. So whenever I'm soloing through stuff, I'll know what's up. On that topic, though, safe soloing, I do want to talk about pre-fader soloing. I tend to pre-fader a few different things in my mix. Drum compression being one of them, so I could tailor it per drum, and it doesn't get affected by turning up or down during a mix. My drum verb always gets pre-fadered, and I make a room with the pre-fadered drum verbs. That's why even in solo on its own, solo safe, pre-fader, nothing else happening. You hear that just going all the time. That's an important thing, because when I'm working with small rooms, when I'm working with things like that, I want to focus on making sure that my drum room feels as real as possible when it's a fake one. How much different or processing on real kick and snare? Yeah, for sure. On this song, I'm not totally sure what it was recorded with. I think I was given a kick out and I ended up trashing it in favor of just the kick in. I could be wrong. So we'll take a listen to this kick in. So I'm leaning fairly heavy on the sample, but what I am doing is, hokey doke, look at that. What I am doing is getting as much good out of that real kick as possible. So in the real kick, let's say, I listen for the characteristics in it. I hear it's got a cool snap, or has the potential for a cool snap. It's not crazy big on low end. It has some mud in it, like most kick drums do. So I would go in, do some cleanup. Make it stand on its own as much as possible. This is a big boost here, but this is mainly to give that attack to the kick drum. This is try to compensate for a bit of the low end missing, and then, clean up jobs here and there. It must have been a frequency that was super annoying on the kick. And then pinning it with some compression. So I process that like that, and then I process the kick just by taking out what I don't like, and then also, taking out even more of what I don't like. It's a pretty common practice between both of them. In this song in particular, I liked, I needed a bit more out of a kick drum, so I went in and went pretty heavy on the sample. But I processed them basically the same way. Obviously, they sound completely different regardless of processing. That's just because, they are different sounds. They are different kick drums and things like that. But you see that, like, I no matter what, I'll sort of lean towards doing the same thing when I'm processing a kick drum. Snare drum, on this song in particular, we'll take a listen. I felt that the real snare had a lot of good vibe. You hear a lot of transient in it. So, I went in, I gated it with the debleeder, which is a frequency dependent gate. Clipped it a little bit with some tape. Tape head, as you'll see in a lot of my sessions, is just a really great way to lengthen a snare in a good frequency range. And then on VMR, it looks like I tried some stuff. I probably tried a bit of saturation, and that's when I reverted to tape head. And then, yeah, I'm doing nothing but boosting a boatload of the fundamental low and a ton of 8K. Whoops! A ton of 8K. And that's probably not much different than what's happening on the snare on the sample. Yeah, boosting 7.5 or 8 roughly, and boosting the fundamental, and hitting those with a generous amount of compression going on. Sample is not being hit with as much compression, probably because I've got it going more to the parallel comp than the real drum. So yeah, I don't really process them differently. Like I was saying, I'll sort of look for the sounds I want out of them, and then I'll reach for the sample when I realize I want something more at the end of the day. For fake rooms, thank you. For fake rooms, it's tough. It's tough to describe. I feel fake rooms sound fake to me, but it's also because I know that they're happening. And I think that that's just our brains and how they play tricks on us. I was actually funny enough talking to Cory about this the other day, because I told him I was doing this song, and then I was talking to him about a mix he did where he actually tracked the drums at his small studio, because he works at a small studio as well, where there is a room, but it's kind of tiny. And I was saying to him, like, I thought it was a convincingly large room. I thought it was done at the same place these were, and I found out it wasn't. So I think it's when you're sitting behind the wheel, you will never trick yourself. Oh, hey, Cory. When you're sitting behind the wheel, you will never trick yourself. But if you're tricking everybody else, that's all that matters. It's, the typical, like, blending samples, the typical, working with a small room and making it sound big. So I don't know if personally, I feel fake rooms sound weird. But realistically, if you're solving the problem, then it doesn't matter whether they sound, too fake or too real at the end of the day. So for drums, a couple other little things I want to talk about. The drums came to me sort of cleaned up with these extra floor samples and rack samples. So I went through and probably just kept what was happening here. Yeah, I didn't use as much sample as much as I just wanted to use the real ones. I think the real ones that are in there are just hanging out in there. Yeah, it's negligible. You could even kill those. And what I'm doing there is typical tom stuff, where I'm taking a lot of 550, 560, boosting what's more important in the low end of the toms. I use this guy a lot on toms, not as much these days, especially since I've been rocking the Arouser so much, but this was such a great little comp to hold drums into place. And again, a fast attack, fast release, typical go-to Sam stuff when it comes to that. I want to talk a little bit about the overheads in this. They came in really great, really well tracked. You could see tons of crash. Cory, I know if you're still here, I don't know how you get so much crash cymbal perfectly balanced in your overheads, but it's a great little time. Like, if I didn't know better, I'd assume that these were literally just, like, gain boosted louder on purpose when they happen. Yeah, great job on those. You need to teach me what you're doing there. Oh, weird. CSEQ. I guess I wanted a bunch of brightness on the top of that boy, so I grabbed this guy, went for it. Typical me, removing anything it added. So the goal was to make the overheads, they sounded great. The separation was great. They were a little harsh, as overheads always are. So I went in and took care of those problems. And then probably this Arouser's here just to solve the discrepancy of, just to solve a bit of, like, compression discrepancy. So it's really pinning down those loud crashes. And balancing out the delivery of the rest of them. Equally from the snare, and then aim to keep them pretty close to the cymbals. Interesting. Yeah, I imagine, I don't know who you had. You told me who you had drumming on this, but I forgot. And it was, I imagine that made a world of difference in that way, especially cymbal choice as well. So it's nice is when when overheads are, Joey, when overheads are properly tracked like this. That's when you realize you learn the most, or not, you gain the most, I should say, from having extra microphones like hat and ride mics. They now have their own place in the mix when you've got extra control over them like that. And like I said, I received these cleaned up like this, but this is a great practice. I do it on my own mixes all the time. This is a great practice in keeping clarity in your mixes, is, deleting what you don't need for the most part. All right, so a couple of things I did in this mix that I don't always do. I split the bass in 2 different tones. I think it's probably because I wanted a heavier tone in some spots, because as you notice in this song, the verses are really chill and the choruses are super big. So we'll take a look at that. And Cory was nice enough to add a bass sub throughout the whole thing, which is very useful to adding extra low end. Great little trick. A lot of the times I'd probably automate these things. I think if you look here, the only difference is, oh no, they're actually fairly differently treated in general. A lot of the times I'll just automate the drive if I'm keeping the same settings, but I guess on this I wanted completely different bass tones per part. So, I've got the drive pinned on the angrier bass track, and I've got it way more backed off on this one. Did I use printed snare verb? No, I used R verb, probably the setting I normally use. Yeah. The old version of the Studio A setting before I changed it to my snare verb version, where the only difference is a roll off, and I could tell that because I put a roll off there. Oh, and I got a little bit of extra out of it. Why not?
I've been searching for something, and I'm fearful that I'll never find your light so warm.
Don't know why, but that is, to me, such a great snare reverb for just, a random plugin, random preset that I just tweaked a little bit. It's got this great little plate sound. Even though it's a room type, it feels platey to me.
Warm, so bright. I'll sleep with the cold. Feel the ice in my bones.
Oh, into the room sample, yeah. Or into the snare sample, there's definitely a baked room. And we'll take a peek at that. I noticed from the last couple sessions that people really wanted to see what's happening on those, so I think it's fair just to sort of show you what's up. My snare sample on this is called Dong on Crack, which I guess was a lot of the snare dong. These two adding a boatload of that mid exciting snare sound. Couple extra rooms baked in there. I don't know. Oh, no, I don't want to clear the slot. I don't know where that's from. And then this random one shot room, which adds a bit of top end. Yeah, so a lot of the heavy lifting in this sample is from the CLA pack, the dong snare. And then, these 3 here. And then checking the phase on these 2 samples. And blending it all in. Yeah, so in this song, yeah, I baked in a little bit. Like I said, I don't do this as much these days. I'll print a fake room track and roll with it. But this was my go-to snare sound for a long time. So so I came back to, it had its baked-in rooms for a while.
To time out of.
All right, so we'll take a look at, we'll talk a little bit more about the bass quick. Like I was saying, I didn't do much craziness to the bass. Thank you. That means a lot. I feel like I struggle with snare drum. I think a lot of producers do. It's such a defining sound in a mix. Even recently as yesterday, I was playing with, different ways to break out of using, Slate stuff that I normally use and trying to make my own snare samples. And I made a couple in the last couple sessions I did that I'm very proud of and really excited. And I'm going to do a video soon where I basically go through a session of a song like this and rebuild the snare with a sample of mine to show that it's not always like, you don't always need a commercial pack to achieve those sort of things. So bass was fairly simple. This limiter and this VMR are here literally to treat the bass guitar as if I'd recorded it in my studio. This is something I do a lot when I receive tracks because I print bass pretty hard. We'll take a look quick. I'm pretty aggressive when it comes to tracking bass on the way in, and this is almost always what my bass looks like when I track on the way in. So whenever I receive a session from somebody else, my first thing to do when I'm working on bass is basically set up the chain bass guitar-wise before it even hits the amp sim to sound how it would have sounded if I tracked it. Yeah, it's very, very important to be in your comfort zone when you're working, and one part of my comfort zone for bass guitar is really, really focusing in on it. It's funny that I did that there. So this, this tone has a lot of distortion on it. And while I was even just turning those plugins back on, I was like, this sounds really good. But I turned this on and it all disappeared and I was like, Hur. But I remember that, like, how it stood in the mix was really nice. Aw, thank you guys, that means a lot. I'd love to do a video. I want to do a video where I talk about little things like that. Obviously, I'm struggling for time because I'm doing some work and everything, and I'm carving out the time to do these. But maybe I'll do a mix breakdown video where I talk about elements like that. Maybe I'll try to get a couple sessions set up and go through, mix breakdown of how I would do things versus just looking at a song. That's a pretty good idea, actually. So this song, I had no DIs for these guitars, which isn't a huge deal because Cory tracked really good tones. And I went through and we'll take a look at them because there's definitely some stuff happening on these guitars I don't normally do. So I think what I really wanted to do was hone in and make these sound a little closer to each other. I know a lot of guys like to track different amps left and right. I'm not a fan of that. I don't mind different guitars left and right, but different amps left and right isn't really for me because it skews the stereo field a little bit too much. So I think a goal with these rhythm guitars was to make them sound the same. So I started, first experience with Evertune, eh? Yeah. Now you're a lifelong Evertune guy, aren't you, Cory? There's the perfect example. I would never make EQ moves like this. This is me matching the left tone to the right tone a little bit. So I got both tones sounding how I wanted. I chose the tone I enjoyed the sound of more, and I fed one Pro Q to the other Pro Q to get them to be a little closer. And it is unfair how good that is. So here's without it. Sorry, hang on a sec. Here's without it. That's flipping between without it and the track I matched it to, and then here's with it and the track I matched it to. So with it. And that was really important to me to keep the connection of the guitars together in a wider field. Obviously, when you EQ match, it does some stupid moves like this random one here and this one here. So, and that one, although that one's not useful because there's a roll off there. So I went through and, I disabled the ones that I thought were really stupid. You don't need this many points. I probably played through and realized, sounds fine, and rolled with it. You could definitely EQ match with a lot less, in my opinion. I almost always use my Evertune guitars if possible. I own 3 of them. I've got a Jaguar with 2 humbuckers, a Telecaster Custom with a tele pickup in the neck, in the bridge, and a humbucker in the neck, and then the Ben Weinman LTD was the first one I bought. Yeah, as much as possible, just like Cory said, almost always using Evertune guitars in the studio. They are an insane time saver, especially for rhythm guitars. They sound incredible, at least if if it's a good guitar, it's going to sound incredible regardless, but you get this added bonus of never having to tune in between. And I literally mean never. When I bought my Jaguar, it was shipped in the middle of winter. It took 2 weeks to get to me. I opened it up and I pulled it out of its case and I strummed it, and it was perfectly in tune to the scent, and I was laughing my head off. Let's take a look at these little delicate cleans going on in this jam. So from bypassing all that, it seems it didn't need too much craziness. This looks like I probably left it on from when Cory sent it to me. I always, almost always edit guitars by hand. These days I'm never tracking an amp, so I'm only tracking a DI. I hit it with a little bit of compression so I can see what's going on, and I will edit them on the fly by hand. It's the only thing I edit on the fly. I usually edit drums later. I usually edit, other stuff later, but guitars and bass I'll edit on the fly just so I know they're done and I can get it out of my brain. If it's a really bad guitarist and I'm angry at the session and it's been, 2 days of guitars that should have only taken, 5 hours, there is a good chance I will elastic time the DIs. I'll only do this if I've got my Evertune, and I'll only do this if the playing is so insanely bad that I can't save it by just slipping parts in and out. And yeah, I'll hit it with a little bit of compression. Yes, A, so I can see all the transients, and B, because I actually like the sound of guitars feeding into amps with compression. I like their snappiness. I like that extra attack you get off the top of each note. But yeah, almost always by hand unless I really need to. Then I'll go in elastic time away. So these guitars, what am I doing? Basically the exact same thing to both of them, which is pretty hilarious to me. I guess I thought the tones were really close, and then just pinning them in place. Yeah, handling the most annoying frequency in it, which I think is happening during the riff part. That was the worst sound in the world. Yeah, copied it over just, to take care of it on the left and right side. This little cathedral track that's added in here. Ooh, Fender Twin. Yeah, I was going to say the verb on that's really nice. It's a very spring verb that you hear in these shots. those sound great. Good job, Cory. And then this little cathedral track that's just going through here. Stuff like this is a great way to add depth to a part that you're not expecting. It's basically, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's probably just like a freeze on a chord that's just being looped a whole bunch. I went in, cleaned it up a little bit, took out some offending frequency, and then added even more verb to it because I like the space. That sound with the lo-fi drum beat at the beginning is every chill beat to do your homework to ever made. This creative little lead going on here. Am I doing the reverbs on it? Or the delays? I think I am. So these came printed with all this craziness going on, and I loved it, and I didn't want to do much, but I wanted to make it even gnarlier. So I don't even think I EQ'd it by the look of it. All I did was this CLA effects plugin, just basically in over-the-top mode on all of these little things. Tons of delay, tons of extra reverb, a little bit more chorus, and top end to make it fight, to not have it fight so much on top of the other guitars. I don't, Cory, if you're still here, I don't think there was. I think, honestly, on most of this record, it was left and right rhythms. From the sound of it, they're playing the same voicings. And while there weren't guitar stacks used in this song, this sparkly guy down here is adding a lot of character. The acoustic guitar, which is one of my favorite things to do in choruses as well, is adding a ton. You know, so while there isn't much more than just the left and right guitars doing the same thing in the rhythms, there are other, not voicings as much as characteristics happening throughout the chorus to build it in different ways. The acoustic adding a percussive element. Oh yeah, Cory's saying that the acoustics are different voicing, which is a great trick as well to do. While we're here on this acoustic talk, we'll talk about it a bit. These came fairly compressed on the way in. Good job, Cory. I as well do this to acoustics. I don't know if you guys have caught on, but I compress the piss out of everything. Yeah, acoustics are hands down my favorite thing to add to choruses. Doubling riffs, like when we were looking at the Romancer video in that like clean intro to give it that vibe of almost hearing like the guitar mic sound. So all I'm doing here is cleaning them up a little bit, removing some offending stuff down in the lows, which happens really easily with acoustics. You know, in an acoustic song, you'd want that stuff a little bit more, but when you're trying to fight a ton of frequencies, especially a song like this where we've got the extra low end on the bass with the bass synth and everything, it's good to just get rid of that. You want this to hear the strumminess of it more than you want anything else. Removing annoying sounds in it. I didn't want to hear that anymore, so I got rid of it. And then just brightening it a little bit. And this is, okay, so this is what I always do to acoustics as well. I don't think we talked about acoustics too much on many of the videos yet. A bit of compression to keep them into place. As I said, these look like they were tracked with a lot of compression, so I didn't go overboard adding extra. I just did it to hold them down. And then to even the left and right, I almost always L1 acoustics just to catch the peaks. Sorry, I'm having a lot of fun with this new Zoom thing. I was really excited to incorporate that into the video, and I've only done it twice so far. Those things, coupled with, you know, a very sparkly guitar. I mean, you got yourself a stew going. That's basically the acoustic version of the song right there. But yeah, listening to that all together. Those two elements add so much to build the chorus into a sort of different spot than just, you know, adding another layer of crazy distortion. And those are sort of tricks that I do in my productions, and that, you know, clearly Cory does in a lot of his productions, that really set apart just a boring chorus to turn it into something else. Especially in a song like this, we're about to talk about some vocals. There aren't a lot of harmonies going on. There aren't a lot of things. It's really important that when you've got strong vocals and you've got just simple melodies and things like that, to really fill out the width of the song. And it adds to the dynamic of it so much too, in such a beautiful way. I get lost in this record. I listen to this record so much. I think it's one of my favorite mixes I've ever done in terms of drum sounds and in terms of width of everything. It's really important to you know, let the song kind of become its own with those sorts of things. Cory, if you're still here, enlighten me a little bit on these crazy sparkle bits that are happening here. By the look of it, you did these two moves and I just kept them, but are they just little chunks of like noise happening, like little riffs that you printed?
And I'm out of touch, and I'm out of reach. I'm buried underneath the ground beneath your feet. Care too much, and here I am.
Those are really cool. That is something I've never done in a recording that I am just gonna like do more of now. So Cory, teach me what you did there. Pretty cool stuff. All right, so vocals. Vocals have a lot of plugins on some of these spots, and I talked about it a little bit at the beginning of the video, but I didn't want to touch what came to me if it sounded good. So usually when I start mixing a song, I'll start with the chorus, and you're starting to see similar Sam chains happening on the chorus here. So we'll take a listen to this chorus quick. So I wanted to get the bigness of the chorus right. It's always one of my first moves when I'm mixing is to take care of the loudest part of the song, because it's easy to turn everything down. It's tough to turn everything up, especially with the way I mix into compressors and things like that. I want to make sure that these things are handled right away. So I start on the loudest part of the song and I work my way backwards. These vocals have typical Sam stuff going on. I wanted to treat them as if I was recording them and then mixing them as a recording. So I EQ'd them a little bit first, as I normally do.
Oh, Rosemary, I've waited for you. Go burn all of my pedals.
I generally don't do much different than what you're seeing here on like vocal EQ. A little bit of AK boost and some roll off. It looks like I tried this guy first and didn't like it, so I went to the CLA 76, which happens a lot for me.
Oh, Rosemary, I've waited for you.
I love how this plugin sounds. I don't care how old it is. I don't care what people say about programming and blah, 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 blah. I think that the CLA 76 is the best sounding 1176 plugin. I've got two blue stripes next to me, and I will gladly take the CLA 76 over them in most times, especially during mixing. It just holds everything in place. All buttons in just sounds so good all the time, especially when you're trying to keep it less dynamic. It adds the right amount of saturation that I want when I'm working. What it does do, as most heavy compression does, is brings out S's like a friggin' mother frigger.
Oh, Rosemary.
Oh, so you take this guy off.
Oh, Rosemary, I've waited for you. Go burn all of my petals.
Pedals. And they're gone. The beautiful thing about de-essing is I think we were talking about room mics before, and how when you're making fake rooms, at least for me, I can feel that they're fake and it bums me out, but nobody listening notices. That's de-essing. I hate de-essing because I can hear de-essing right away, but I forget that I'm the guy who applies it, so of course I can hear it right away. What it does though is it solves a problem. It removes the S's, especially when there's buildup, and the listener doesn't notice unless they're shown that a de-esser's put on. And I've struggled to remind myself that at times. Was there any compression on the way in? I don't think there was much. Looking at these here, it looks like there wasn't. Especially, we'll talk about some of these other tracks. Like this is a vocal track here. It's just so quiet. Chances are it wasn't compressed on the way in. I also think that there's a bit of preamp peaking happening.
Oh, Rosemary.
So there's a bit of natural compression happening from the preamp, but not much else. Before I talk about that, though, I want to just talk about the L1. As much as I love the CLA 76, as I just praised the heck out of it a second ago, one thing I hate about it is something in its coding makes it snap really fast on certain words.
Oh, Rosemary, I've waited for you.
You can see it do that, which isn't really audible at times, but my wacky brain wants to control that. So what I'm doing with this guy here.
Oh, Rosemary, I've waited for you. Go burn all of my petals. Try and leave me a few.
It's there just catching the absolute top peaks that I don't want happening, which the CLA 76 shouldn't be doing anyways, but unfortunately it is old code like we were talking about a second ago. My real one doesn't do that. In fact, my vocals are going through my real one right now. And I find putting the L1 after the CLA 76, especially if you hit it really hard, makes it sound exactly like a Blue Stripe 1176 to a T, no questions asked kind of thing. I probably found it a little aggressive on backing vocals. I know I've talked about this in a couple other videos where I try not to change settings when I'm flying stuff around, but I guess, as aggressive as it was on the main vocals, I didn't like it on the backing. So I put the arouser on to tame that.
Oh, Rosemary, I've waited for you. Go burn all of my pet.
And I'm using this guy before it, which doesn't do all buttons in. Steven Slate, I wish it did. Please make it. So I've just got on 4-to-1 to treat it like I tracked it with compression on the way in, and then using the arouser to handle the rest of it.
Oh, Rosemary, I've waited for you.
And then multi-mono the RDSer, so each side gets its de-essing happening at the same time. And then this is a trick too. I've started doing this in certain songs. I'm not a huge fan of it, but I will do it when it's necessary, of a sort of soft vocal tucked in.
Oh, Rosemary, I've waited for you. Go burn all of my petals. Try and leave me a few.
It's a great way to add air to a vocal without trying to EQ the air in, which can be a huge pain in the butt sometimes.
Oh, Rosemary,
It's a great way to lift a chorus in a very airy way.
Waiting for you.
And then back onto these harmonies. I basically treated the harmonies like I did the stereo vocals. Didn't want a crazy amount of that blue stripe vibe, all buttons in. I just wanted them sort of pinned.
Waiting for you.
3 main centered. Yeah, it's basically what's happening in this. So there's the left and rights and the center vocal.
Oh, Rosemary, I've waited for.
All with the same character, and then the vocal high in there.
Oh, Rosemary, I've waited for you. Go burn all of my petals. Try and leave me a few.
So we'll talk about the verses a little bit. Like I said, I received them sort of this way and rolled with it. The reverb on these parts is CLA vocals right on the track.
I've been searching for something, and I'm fearful that I'll never find your light. So warm, so bright, I'll sleep with the cold.
They're very bright, probably way brighter than I do a vocal. Yeah, they've got revival going on, a bit of 10K boost by the look of it, a bit of 3K boost. I probably tweaked this a little bit just to pin them a little bit more. And then RVox, which I never used, but I mean, it sounded really good, so I rolled with it.
Don't leave me here alone to rot in sorrow.
This vocal chill is probably my favorite part of the song. It's so quiet. It's just barely being picked up by the mic even. And yeah, we've got CLA 76 to bring it up at first. All buttons, which I think is hilarious.
And I'm out of touch, and I'm out of reach. I'm buried under.
It's actually not even doing anything by the look of it, so it's probably just
Cared too much.
probably there for the character of it more than anything.
Cared too much. And here I am.
Low vocals can suffer sometimes from a lack of low end, so there's a bit of a low end boost going on here. And then RVox here is super pinned. RVox is really clean. It was probably why it was used here, just to sort of really get it loud without it being like compressed.
Cared too much. And here I am.
Such a great dynamic part. I'm going to play this part going into the chorus here from the second half.
Cared too much. And here I am. Living with the stones and trying to bloom so I can breathe. Oh, Rosemary, I've waited for you.
And even though there's these 3 massively different parts, I'm going to color vocal chill a different color so we can talk about it a little more. Even though there's these 3 massively different parts in the song, in terms of EQ, like these verses are so bright, this is so chill, and then these choruses are a lot darker but bigger. They play well because of the production of this song. With this little transition here, it lets us lead into this epically huge chorus that doesn't need to sound like the verses did. Second verse is all the same stuff happening. There's a harmony that I added. I think Brett and I discussed making a few different changes.
Are you weaker at the knees? Am I blind? I know you'd love to plant and forget as a pastime.
I hate my own voice.
Or am I blind? I know you love to plant and forget as a pastime. I'm not disposed.
And then back to the Brent harmony. As much as I hate my own voice, I do find it blends really well with people. That's actually a good little talk. So I compressed this on the way in, and you can tell it's very aggressively compressed, even for a chilled little part, versus, say, like the main vocals, which are a little more loose. And that's just a good old me. I probably did this, yeah, on my Neve, and probably with an SM7 into the Blue Stripe.
Or am I blind? I know you love to plan and forget as a pastime.
Throughout the record, there has tracks called Ooh Much, because I think I brought it from another song where the lyric was too much, and whatever setting was on that became the setting for this track throughout the whole record. A lot of little things like this were done where there was committal on the way in, or like sent to me like big groups.
Your light so warm, so bright. Don't leave me here alone to rot in sorrow.
So I had no say in the levels of these parts. They were sort of printed like this, which I had no problem with because they were really well done.
Don't leave me here alone to rot in sorrow. Find your light.
So because they sat so well and just did their own thing, I didn't add anything. I took a bit of the low end off just so they weren't rumbly, but they were super compressed and everything already.
Where is that light? Does it curse you when I'm dying in sleep? Do you feel complete, or am I simple? Time out of touch, time out of reach. I'm buried under the ground beneath. Care too much. Here I am, living with the stones and trying to bloom so I can breathe.
So when drums break down like that, I love boosting the verb on them. It's really important to keep them sounding, verb gets eaten up so quick by everything else. And all we've got here is a snare drum. So it's really important to have that glue with the sound of everything else happening. So the snare verb and the drum verb get turned up during this little chill part.
Time out of touch, time out of reach. I'm buried under the ground beneath. Care too much. Here I am.
I'm going through little delay throws.
Care too much. Here I am, living with the
Like I said, I picked a really simple song on this record because I wanted to show how few tracks can really make a big sound on a mix. The automation on the song is dead easy as well. I'm not one of those guys who likes to go nuts with automation if I really don't need to. And as another reason I picked this is like to show how you can build dynamic solely based on how a song is tracked. The bass's dynamic comes from me switching from heavy tones in the chorus and light tones in the verses. The guitar dynamic is built into the production of the song where there's no distortion happening in the verses. Same with the drums. The drums are playing simpler stuff in different spots. And since the drums are sort of the constant, that's where if you look here, and the bass levels, that's where you sort of see the majority of the automation happening on this mix. Is I grouped the drums and bass together, as labeled here, D and B. Went through, built my dynamic in the song. Little moves like this are super important to make them not feel as jarring. Even quick, that's one beat of a fade down really helps those drums glue and really helps them launch into the next part.
living with the stones.
They get full volume right on that snare hit, and it's really important there to hear that huge snare hit happen, and then everything launches in. Oh, one more thing on the vocals I want to talk about. I have no shame in using CLA vocal for my reverbs. Its reverb is incredible. Its slap is a good slap delay, and a little bit of stereo spread is always nice on vocals. So this is not my go-to setting always. My go-to setting is usually tight instead of large, and by the look of it, this guy might be automated. No, it's not automated. But the tight reverb is a great little reverb to just constantly leave on every vocal, so why not use a plugin that works really well in those situations? Do you automate as you go, or do you make a mix with the levels you want and then go in afterwards? I automate afterwards. So a big thing that's important to me is a static mix. And in that static mix is, like I said, I start with the chorus. So the chorus is my loudest spot in the song, and that's where all my faders will be. And I'll go from there and build the dynamic around that. So on a song like yours, Brent, the dynamic was built into these spots for me already. So I mixed the song imagining how I'd want these guitars at these levels. And then I went back and compensated by bringing the drums and bass down in those spots when I wanted them to sort of change in level. And that's almost always how I do it. Obviously, if it's a song where the guitar tones don't change and everything is very big and loud the whole time, usually these three are grouped together instead, and that shaving is done around constantly. But in a song like this, I just needed to group the drums and bass because the guitars had their own built-in dynamic. And then I do little moves like, 1.5 dB quieter in certain spots. This bridge gets way quieter, but the drums make up for it a lot. And then if I want, in a song like this where I've got the vocals split every single part, like this is the verse vocal, this is the pre-chorus vocal, this is the chorus vocal. I don't need to go nuts automating vocals either because each one have their own little world. Second verse or second pre-chorus, I turned up the quiet bit because there's more instrumentation happening here.
Time out of touch, time out of reach, and time out of touch.
Listening to them back and forth, you can hear that they're clearly audible volume differences. But in a mix, this is just a compensation move to help for how much bigger everything comes around it. Its goal isn't to be heard. Its goal is to solve a problem, which is why isn't the vocal loud enough?
And time out of touch. Time out of touch. Time out of reach.
In fact, looking at this mix, that is the only vocal automation in the entire thing. And I think it's important, to hear every part the right way. I have no problem going nuts with automation when I need to, but this is a clear example of how every part has its own vibe. Every part got its own treatment. And I don't normally mix like this, so it's nice to be able to show what I would do when I mix like this.
I don't know if this makes me a bad person. The truth is, I don't know if I'll ever love again. Again.
And this little lo-fi sample that there's a few of these across the album. I know Brent was a big fan of having this sort of vibe across the record.
I don't know if this makes me a bad person. But the truth is, I don't know if I'll ever love again. Again.
I didn't do anything to the sample except just drop it in. To me, it just needed to be there. We probably discussed the level of it during the mix phase, and then, yeah.
I don't know if this makes me a bad person. The truth is, I don't know if I'll ever love again. Again.
Oh, that's you actually speaking there? I thought it was like a movie clip or something. That's really cool. I learned something new today. Anyways, guys, that is Seed by Certainty. Seed in brackets, Rosemary. Yeah, very simple mix. Very exciting song. I didn't do a lot to this that I would do in any other session differently. I just, through this whole record even, listened to what needed to be done and did it. And that's usually the best approach, in my opinion, when it comes to making a mix. I almost never reference during mixing. On this record, there were reference mixes when I first received the record. My goal was I just listened to those. I wanted to capture the vibe of those, but make the Sam version. These days, I reference a little bit more. But honestly, yeah, I don't reference a lot. If I'm referencing a song, it's to check low-end levels against other things, or to sometimes, hilariously enough, check like a snare drum level, because I find I'll mix a snare kind of quiet, and then I'll listen to a record and be like, Jesus, that snare drum is loud. So yeah, no, I'm only referencing to check low-end, top-end, things like that. It's important to make sure those things are balanced across your mix, and they are very tough things to do. So, I'm not referencing to hear a sound of a record as much as I'm just referencing to check overall. I like how this mix's low end is. Does my mix have that same low end? Sick, I'm on a good track. And yeah, guys, that is Seed by Certainty. If you guys have any last questions, I'm just going to play out the outro of this song. I love hearing it. And yeah.
I don't know if this makes me a bad person. The truth is, I don't know if I'll ever love again. Again.
My go-to mastering guy is I'm gonna butcher his last name, Mike Collette. Sorry, Mike. Mike Collegian. Rogue Planet Mastering. He's my dude these days. Although I believe that John Niclario at Nada Mastering did this record for me, and he is also my dude. He's done so much for me. His masters are amazing. I would check him out. Nada Recording, Nada Mastering. He kills it. Oh, and the plugin on my TalkBack is Mute-O-Matic. Turns off when I play stuff back. And I'm back. I do have a sub while I mix. I've got the HS10W, which is the sub that goes with the HS series stuff, or the old HS series stuff, like the 80s and the 50s. So I've got my NS10s into the HS10 sub, and that's on TalkBack control. I'll use the sub while I'm mixing, and then about halfway through mixing, I'll turn the volume really low, and I'll kill my sub, and I'll mix all the important stuff at that level, and then just turn my sub off and on to check the important stuff at the end of the day. Aside from that, that's basically all I use my sub for. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this one. I'll be back on Thursday. Not totally sure what song I'm doing yet, but I'm sure it'll be a fun one. So this week, Monday, and then, Thursday. Gives me a few more days in the middle of the week to do some stuff. Thanks again for checking this out, and let's hang soon. Oh, yeah, if you like what you saw today, obviously, don't forget to subscribe. Feel free to send me any messages at any time or any comments or anything like that. I love responding to these things. I love talking shop. And, catch you next time.